Welcome to today's special Pearson Center webinar on the issues that should be discussed during the federal election, which is likely to be called very shortly. My name is Francesca Iacorto, and I'm a board member at the Pearson Center. I'm also the Senior Director of Public Affairs at the National Airlines Council of Canada. Before I go on, I just want to take a moment to recognize that the Pearson Center is headquartered on the traditional lands of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. As you may know, the Pearson Center is a leading progressive think tank that addresses the big and challenging issues of the day. Since the start of COVID in the spring of 2020, we have hosted over 50 webinars on key issues affecting Canada, and these webinars have been attended by over 10,000 people. We are proud to say that we are the only think tank that has included representatives from all 5 federal parties, the top business leaders, labor and civil society leaders, as well as many other experts. As we like to say, we bring people and ideas together to come up with good public policy ideas. And now a very special thank you to all our sponsors who make our events possible, and particularly our sustaining sponsors that include Canada's Building Trades Unions, the International Association of Firefighters, and AMAPSEO, Ontario's professional employees. While these webinars are free to attend, please feel free to visit our website at www.thepearsoncenter.ca and make a contribution if you are able. Today, our webinar is about the upcoming federal election and more specifically, the issues that we should all be thinking and talking about. We are delighted to have with us today 3 influential and seasoned former politicians to talk about these issues. First, we have with us Olivia Chow, who was an NDP MP for Trinity-Spadina from 2006 to 2014 and a major force within her party. She's also been a Toronto City Councillor and mayoral candidate. She's a founder and executive director for the Institute for Change Leaders at Ryerson University in Toronto. She has spoken at the Pearson podium many times before, so a very big welcome back to you, Olivia. We also have with us today the Honourable Lisa Raitt, who was a Conservative MP from 2008 to 2019, first from the riding of Halton, then from Milton in Ontario. She served in the cabinet of Prime Minister Stephen Harper in the portfolios of Labour, Natural Resources and Transport, and last year was also the co-chair of the Conservative Leadership Convention. She now serves as Vice Chair, Global Investment Banking at CIBC, and as of this morning, she's also serves as co-chair of the Coalition for a Better Future, which is looking to develop an ambitious economic vision for Canada. And of course, I'm also pleased to mention that Lisa is a 2020 recipient of the Pearson Progressive Leadership Award. And with us also today is Brian Gallant, who's a former Premier of New Brunswick, serving from 2014 to 2018, having begun as Liberal leader in 2012. He is presently the CEO of the Canadian Centre for the Purpose of the Corporation, and I'm happy to note that he's also an advisory board member of the Pearson Centre, a very thoughtful contributor to the affairs of the Centre, and a frequent moderator of Pearson webinars in both official languages. And I'm now delighted to tell you that our moderator today is Travis Dhanraj. He is a new arrival on the federal political scene, and he now serves as senior parliamentary reporter for CBC News, having worked for various networks in the past, most recently as Queen's Park Bureau Chief for Global News. In terms of the format, we will have a 45-minute discussion with our guests before we turn the floor over to you, the audience, for a 15-minute Q&A period. So please use the question box on your screen and we will get to as many questions as we can before we wrap up at 4:30 Eastern Time. And on that, I will welcome Travis to Ottawa and turn the floor over to him.
All right, thanks very much, Francesca. And guys, it's my first time, as Francesca said, so please go easy on me. Lisa, Olivia, I've interviewed you multiple times before. Brian, it is nice to meet you. But I want to jump right into it so that we have a lot of time for discussion. We are all at home right now. We're doing this virtually because we've been doing this for the last year and a half or so. People are still getting their vaccines right now, and there is talk about an impending 4th wave. Is this the right time to call an election? Lisa, I'll start with you.
So I don't think so. And I think you put it very well to the point, Travis, which is we're not out of the pandemic yet. I would compare it to the period of time between 2008 and 2011 when the Harper government had a minority government. And really, we were out of the economic crisis before we ended up with an election at that point in time. And I'd also point out that one of the things that concerns me is that there needs to be stability in the government. When the government is in the midst of a campaign, it's in caretaker mode, which means that the bureaucracy pretty much has the reins, and that's fine. That's the way everything is supposed to be. But we do have a brewing issue with respect to the border with the CBSA, who is looking at work action starting on Friday morning. And with that kind of uncertainty, especially when it comes to trade across the border and people moving across the border, I don't know whether or not now is the right time for us not to have access to a parliament or for the government to be fully in control of the decision making on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to having their attention divided with everyone worrying about whether or not they're going to be elected in their own local riding. So for me, I fully understand from a political point of view why now makes sense for politics. I just don't feel it's a good time for the country to go to the polls.
And Brian, let me pick up on that point with you. Is this all just about politics? Is this because the Liberals are polling high right now?
Well, let's put things in context. Obviously, it's a minority parliament. We often see in this type of situation the shelf life of a government to be about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years, sometimes even shorter than that. So this shouldn't come as a major surprise. Of course, with the pandemic, we're not done. It's not ideal. That's certain, and I think any Liberal would acknowledge that. But I think we also have to look at what's happened across the country. We've had elections in many provinces. We've had governments call elections, NDP, Conservative and Liberal governments call elections. They have gone relatively well, with I think a little bit of a hiccup certainly in Newfoundland and Labrador. But nevertheless, there really has been no indication that the election caused or exacerbated the situation in any of these provinces. So I think we obviously have to have everything in place to ensure that an election could happen safely and that people's health, of course, is the utmost priority. But with that said, we saw that it can be done. And I also think, given where we're at, Canadians would probably want to be heard, whether it's right now or in this period, on how the response has gone, but probably even just as important, how it's going to go moving forward. And of course, as we all recognize, there's been lots of government intervention in Canada at all levels of government, and of course, I would argue around the world because of the pandemic. So that sort of creates I think, an opportune time and a situation for Canadians to be able to voice what they want moving forward. Do they want this type of intervention to continue because of the response to the pandemic? Do they want some of that to continue even post-pandemic, if there is going to be such a thing, in other types of programming and supports and policies? So it really is, I think, an interesting time to have a conversation as Canadians, what we want from government, not only in the continued response, but also, like I said, if there's such a thing, post-pandemic.
And Olivia, I was talking to Elections Canada yesterday. They say that they, if this is called, they can do it safely. They have contingency plans, precautions in place. They have alternate polling stations. Why is this not an opportune time?
Well, 2 days ago, my grandkids, actually last Sunday, my grandkids got a headache and got starting to get sore throat and got sick. And then my other second, and then the third, and then the fourth grandkids got sick. Their mom and dad got sick. They all have these fever and sore throat. So there was massive panic. Go get tested. Is it COVID, right? Because they're little kids, they're under 12. We have one 12-year-old, she got vaccinated. All the adults are vaccinated, but my God, it was a bit scary. It was all negative. It was your summer cold. But still, you have people that are worried about getting COVID or going into a workplace. You don't know who has been vaccinated. There's no mandatory vaccination for public servants. There's a national dialogue of hey, get everybody vaccinated. So right now, all my friends, what they are thinking about is, who has been vaccinated? Can I go to places safely? Can I hang out with my friends? I haven't played with my grandkids for a whole year, for heaven's sake, right? I want to spend some time with them. If there's an election, yeah, it could be safe, but do we need one? Not really. The NDP has been supporting the Liberal. In fact, I've actually never seen this. You have the leader of the New Democrats saying, you know what? We're not going to cost an election. Go ahead and govern. We'll support you. My goodness, I thought, what? You're going to do that? That was like, Lisa, that's not heard of, right? You've been around. Normally, we'll see what you do, and then but Jagmeet Singh has said, we'll support you, almost like a blank check. Let's get this pandemic over with. So that's stability. Normally, you go to an election is not stable. There's a crisis that needs to be solved. We're doing okay now, right? Or that the election time has come. It's only 2 years. It costs money to do an election. Why not wait till the election time that I've prescribed, which is in another 2 years? Because you basically you can govern in a pretty stable location. So anyway, yeah, do people want one? I don't think so. The political junkie like Lisa and I, maybe, or Brian, or maybe you, Travis, but I don't think so. People want to spend some time with their friends and their family because they haven't been able to do so. But hey, that's from my perspective.
Well, I mean, despite the fact that some folks may not want an election, it looks like that is where we are headed. And I want to dig into some specific topics in a moment. But first off, do you think that there is one main ballot box question for Canadians right now? We'll start the reverse way. So Olivia, I'll start with you.
A main one? How am I going to find a job after all this, or have a decent standard of living? Can I be safe? Can my mom and dad be safe? There's a bunch of things that deals with a bit of a sense of insecurity. Who's going to actually put me first? Okay, my housing cost is too high, or I don't have I don't have clean drinking water. Climate change. There's a forest fire going on not far away. I'm really hot. I don't have air conditioning in my nursing home. Those are questions that our ordinary Canadians are experiencing. And I think the ballot box question is, can I trust this government to put me first? Not their financial buddies, not people that run nursing homes or whatever, not-for-profit stuff. Can I be put first because I have some needs? I think that probably is the feeling that I need to have. Who identified with the need that I have would put me first. It's I think probably the ballot box question.
Brian, the last provincial election here in Ontario, folks said it wasn't about Doug Ford, it was about whether or not folks wanted more Kathleen Wynne. Is this about Justin Trudeau and whether or not Canadians want another Justin Trudeau mandate?
It's going to be very difficult for this campaign and the ballot box of this campaign not to be about the pandemic. It's almost impossible to envision. I mean, very rarely do you have something that is so top of mind, so impactful in people's lives that while going into a campaign, if the rumors are true and we're going into one. So I just think it'll be about the pandemic. Now, that said, I think there are subsets to that conversation. The pandemic is sort of the umbrella conversation, the umbrella topic, the umbrella ballot box question, as is often referred to. But there's sub-questions such as, well, with the pandemic, who's going to address inequality? Who's going to help ensure that we address the she session? Who's going to help ensure that I have better childcare so I'm able to get back into the workforce or be able to stay in the workforce? Who's going to help address the mental health challenges that were created by the pandemic? Who's going to address the economic woes that we may be facing, the uncertainty as an individual, a family, a community, or the country, or even the world's economy? Who's going to maybe address the finances? Obviously, I would argue that that's probably more a narrative for Erin O'Toole and the Conservatives, but nevertheless, it's one that will come and stem from this overarching conversation with regards to the pandemic. And to your point, Travis, another subset question could very well be, who do I want still at the wheel during the response of the pandemic, whether it's because of the restrictions that they put in place to keep us safe, or it's the economic and financial programs and policies they put in place to help us get through the pandemic. And that's indeed where there could be a subset question for a lot of people. Do we want Prime Minister Trudeau to still be at the wheel? Do we want the Liberal government to still be at the wheel? And for those that are maybe more strategic voters, they'll think, if they want that, they may say, well, do we also want it to be a minority or a majority? So there's a bunch of subset questions, but there's no question in my mind the pandemic is going to be the focus of the campaign, even though it can sort of manifest itself in different ways.
Lisa, do you agree with that?
I think it's extremely dangerous for a government to call an election on itself without knowing what the ballot box question is going to be. They're not driving the bus on this because they have to make a case as to why they've decided to ask the Governor General to dissolve Parliament. So that's going to be the first question that any candidate's going to face at the door, knock on the door. Hello, I'm running. Why is there an election? For all the reasons that Olivia said, why is there an election? So the Liberal candidates are going to have to answer that question. And I agree with Brian, there's a whole lot of subset issues that we can put out there, but does the voter feel it? No, I don't think they feel it. And the example I would give is I was just in Nova Scotia, my family's in Cape Breton, and I was there for a couple of days. There's an actual election happening and you would never know it. Nobody's talking about it. There's not a lot of issues. People are not paying attention. Lawn signs are way down, not a lot of door knocking going on. So it'll be a very silent kind of federal election unless a burning issue comes up. And the government, the Prime Minister is going to have to come out and say on that first day, this is why I went to the Governor General and this is what I'm seeking. And if the Canadian people don't buy it, then he's going to have a really tough election ahead of him.
Let's dig into some of these subset issues that you allude to, because the economic recovery and how we get past COVID-19 is certainly on a lot of people's minds, especially small business owners who have been shut down for a very long time, just starting to open up now. Brian, what do you want to see from the next government in terms of economic recovery?
I would point to a few things, and if you'll allow me, Travis, I'll shamelessly plug a little bit of research that we're doing at the center that I'm leading. So first, I would personally like to see, although clearly, as I mentioned in the last question and the answer to the last question, that the pandemic will be top of mind, I still want and hope that we're going to discuss as a country what we're going to do about societal challenges of climate change, inequality, inequities, discrimination, Indigenous reconciliation, and all of those are all very intertwined with the economic recovery. We want it to be inclusive, we want it to be fair, we want it to be sustainable. So I hope that although the pandemic will certainly be top of mind, and I obviously understand as to why, I really do hope that we start to think about what are some of the other kind of pillars of that conversation, such as the things that I just mentioned. The shameless plug, at the CCPC, the Canadian Centre for the Purpose of the Corporation, we did some research to see what was top of mind in terms of societal challenges for Canadians, and the ones I listed off are definitely worrying and concerning to people from coast to coast to coast. They're very concerned about inequalities. They're very concerned about climate change and the environment. They're concerned about inequities and the discrimination in the treatment of Canadians. So I think that these are things that definitely need to be discussed. They definitely need to be debated. We definitely need to be thinking about how governments, and the federal government specifically in this case, can play a role in overcoming those societal challenges. So I hope that that's a part of the conversation of the response to COVID and, of course, to the economic recovery. And I say that because we often talk about the economic recovery, but we don't sort of talk about just the recovery of our lives, right? I mean, the mental health languish and the mental health challenges, for example, that we've gone through, the K-shaped economic recovery so far. I mean, there's just so many, which obviously exacerbates inequalities. Black Lives Matter, Indigenous reconciliation, all these things that have happened over the last year and a half, those have to be a part of the recovery conversation. So I understand that it may have to be under the umbrella of economic recovery, and I hope that that will be robustly debated in the weeks to come.
Olivia, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day down in St. Catharines. He got laid off at the start of the pandemic. He still does not have a job, been sending out resumes, even outside of his industry, and he's been on CERB. For folks like him, what should the plan be moving forward?
I actually, Travis, have several friends like that.
Yeah.
And that sense of insecurity and fear, it's steep. And that sense of insecurity is made worse by how much they pay in rent or how close they are in losing their housing. Because if you're not working, if you don't have your own home, even if you have your own home, your mortgage payment, right? So it's like 1 or 2 paychecks away that you can not be able to meet rent. And that's serious stuff. So in my mind, economic recovery is really connected to building affordable housing. Because in big cities or even small town, the housing price is so large that even if you have a job, a lot of your money, your income goes to pay the rent, and you have nothing left to go out to eat, to shop. So if you're looking at economic recovery for small business to do well later on, there has to be some spare money. Now, some of those that have a lot of money have a lot of spare money because they haven't been going out, right? They have a lot to spend. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about those that are not quite middle class, almost sort of middle class, but they are not saving enough. And if there's decent housing, and that means that they pay less in their housing costs, it would free them up to shop and eat out, and it would stimulate the economy. So I think that's one piece. The second piece is all the things that we, taking care of mom and dad, taking care of home care, child care, all of that cost is huge right now. So all of that needs to be lowered. The dollar amount needs to be lowered, but covered by the government, hopefully a bit more as collectively, so that we can take care of I wouldn't want to call them the most vulnerable, because my grandkids wouldn't want to be called vulnerable. Those that needs a bit of support. Then it would free up even more money for those to go and have a meal outside and encourage the restaurants. So in many ways, right now, every time I turn on Netflix, I'm saying, why aren't they paying into some dollar amount so that my artist friend, who's really desperate these days, can get some dollar amount out of it to create some Canadian content, right? Too bad that bill, didn't survive Senate right now. So all types of things are not surviving, because if there's an election, they're all going to die, and all that work wasted. But that's beside the point. So getting the dollar amount from those that have the most to make sure that we take care of each other, I think, is the fundamental thing that we need to do for economic recovery.
Is Lisa, investing in social programs a part of the economic recovery in your view?
For me, it would be. I have to see what the platform is going to be for the Conservative leader when he comes out. Definitely getting through the pandemic, everybody felt a little bit of pain. Everybody felt a lot of pain, either in terms of how businesses had to shut down, or people had to stay home, or people lost their jobs. It's been a tumultuous 18 months. I mean, we've never seen this before in the country. So I think anyone would be ludicrous to run on a platform, and hopefully I'm not going to be seeing this meme forever, but it would be insane to run on a platform saying that you weren't going to be thinking about social programs, because clearly they're still needed in a place. If I were to step back from my incredulity of the fact that we're actually going into an election, and wanted to give you what I think is an issue that should be part of this election, or rather one that I'd see coming out. Olivia is correct. Housing is going to be incredibly important, not only from the point of view of affordable housing, but as well from the point of view of people who simply just cannot get into the game. They can't get into the housing market at all. And they think that, they've got the jobs that they studied for, they're making the salaries that would tell them that they should be able to afford this kind of house, and they're completely priced out of the market. That is going to be something that will have questions at the door for MPs. What are you going to do about my son or daughter who can't buy a house in the area that they grew up in? Because one thing that did come out of the pandemic, as we spent all kinds of time at home, was the importance of home. And a lot of folks who were in 600 square foot condos in downtown Toronto, when you're working 16 hours a day, that's one thing. But now it's a different world. The other thing, Travis, that I would bring up, and why it's an awkward time in terms of transition in the country, is we're still figuring out how people are going to go back to work. In Ottawa, they're just starting to go back into the federal public service in terms of going back into the buildings. And I mean, if you don't have the public service even at their desks, it's really hard to envision how you're going to be able to get through an election and expect that everything is going to be normal and okay, and this is just run-of-the-mill election time. I think there's just so much upheaval right now. It's particularly strange. So I don't even know what kinds of issues are going to come up, except for the ones that bug folks, like housing, like the cost of goods, like whatever is going to come to their attention that day. So an unknown issue can come out of nowhere in these next 5 weeks that can captivate everybody's attention.
Like childcare, I think, as well, because, in order for folks to be able to get back to work, they need their kids taken care of. And we've been hearing about, this promise for a national childcare program for a long time. $10 a day daycare. Olivia, are you confident if the Liberals are reelected that they can deliver on that promise?
Hope so. If there's a will, there's a way. And I think right now, where Lisa is at, Nova Scotia signed on. There's 5 provinces: BC, Newfoundland, PEI, you name it. New Brunswick, I'm not sure yet. New Brunswick, oh, okay, I don't think New Brunswick. I can at least work on that, okay? So it is possible, because 6 provinces coming together, it's doable. Ontario, a bit scary. So we don't know. So it's a piece of it is Ontario government and other government and the Perrys. So hopefully it would happen. But one of the things that we need to think about on the childcare issue, which I care a lot about that. I've been working on it for 30 years. Before my kids were I think I've been working on it when they were in childcare. Now they have grandkids, but I have grandkids, but never mind. It's been a long time coming. Good things take time. But the salary of the childcare workers needs to be dealt with, because right now they're still earning like $17. They can't survive in the city. They can't even afford to be a mom and a dad if they are mostly a mom. So the salary, what format, what shape, is it under education, is it nonprofit? All of that needs to be ironed out. And I hope if the Liberals get reelected, that there is a will to work with those folks that have been around for 20, 30, 40 years, that have lots of expertise, that they would listen to those experts to say, here is the best way to deliver it, and not get captured by what's the latest, right? Because I think I'm worried about big box childcare. I've seen it where they come in, gobble up all the small nonprofits, and then price everybody out, and then the like nursing homes. So greed and profit. I don't mind profit is not, but not on social services. So for childcare, taking care of our seniors, nursing homes, childcare centers, nonprofit has been proven to be much higher quality and the salary is higher for the workers. Therefore, better service for our kids and our seniors.
Brian, why is this going to become reality this time around, and are all of those details ironed out?
Well, a few things. Where there's a will, well, there's a will, there's a way. I mean, as Olivia mentioned, and I definitely think that the Liberal government and the Liberal Party is very focused on this. And the second thing is, I really believe that the challenge has been put in our face. I mean, as you alluded to, Travis, I mean, the pandemic demonstrated to what extent, there are inequalities across the globe, but also here in Canada. It also showed the unfortunate economic impact of the pandemic on women, specifically with the She Session. We saw how difficult it was for parents to be able to try to balance this new sort of world of remote work without childcare, without early childhood development opportunities. So I really do think it's one of the, hopefully, issues that will gain steam, that needs to gain some steam and support, that will come from this pandemic and come from the challenges that were really put on display. So I think that because of that, childcare, and I want to keep adding early childhood development, because often we talk about this and people think we're talking about babysitting. That's not what this is. This is an investment in children's education. This is an investment for parents to be able to get into the workforce, to be able to continue their studies, whatever the case may be. Huge return on our investments in childcare and early childhood development. So all that to say, I do think the stars are aligned. It is a wonderful way to not only help the economic recovery moving forward, it's a way to help respond to the pandemic, and it's a way to address something that may get lost in the shuffle with all the things that need to be discussed over the next few weeks, which is indeed the She Session. So I think the stars are aligned. I'm remaining hopeful, even though New Brunswick hasn't signed on yet. I certainly will remain optimistic, because I think everybody is going to see the need for this because of what we just went through over the last year and a half.
Okay, we got about 20 minutes left or so. Lisa, real quick, if I could get your thoughts on childcare, because I do want to get one or two more topics, and then we have some questions from participants.
Yeah, sure, real quick. Look, the government made an announcement, and the difficulty when you have a federal government trying to make an outcome in a provincial legislation is all you can do is make the announcement on the money and do the photo ops with the premiers and hand over the check and then hope that it gets done. But they do have the ability to say that they brought it in and that they funded it through the provinces. How long it will take for them to actually see the spoils of their efforts could be a long time. I mean, in Nova Scotia, they're going to be waiting for a number of years. And in Ontario, as you point out, Olivia, I don't think they have a deal yet. I think it was a positive announcement for the Liberal government. I don't know how much legs it has. I don't think it ranks really high on public opinion polls in terms as the most crucial issue. Maybe the wrong thing for Canadians not to care about, and I think it's incredibly important, but it may not be that resonating factor as much as it was anymore, and people are kind of assumed it's going to happen. So Liberals got to find something else.
I'm new to Ottawa, as you guys all know, and one of the first things I did was go up to Parliament Hill at night, and around the flame there were hundreds and hundreds of shoes of children. I want to turn to reconciliation now, because flags are still down right across this country, and this is a conversation that has been going on. It's been very emotional, and it's been something that folks that have been following this issue have been screaming from the rooftop for some time. What does any government, Liberal, Conservative, NDP, Green, need to do to further reconciliation from day one? Brian.
Well, first off, I just want to echo your comments. I mean, it really has been something that has been top of mind, I think, for all Canadians. Second, though, I just want to acknowledge the idea that this is new. I mean, I think we have to address that. Friends that I have that are advocates for Indigenous reconciliation were at times even frustrated, because although they were seeing people finally wake up to what happened in these horrendous conditions in schools, they were also a bit flabbergasted that they're just waking up. I mean, they had been saying this for years, advocates. It was in the TRC report. It really is something that should have been, we all should have woken up to a lot earlier than this, and it took the very devastating news that we have received over the last few weeks over the summer for Canadians to wake up. Now, look, Canadians have woken up to it though, so moving forward, I think the one thing that I would say is there's no question that the federal government needs to step up in a big way. Obviously, it was nice to see finally some major investments and some recognition of all the work that's been done for the water issues that we have on just too many Indigenous communities. But I just want to say one thing, is that the idea that we can just ask the federal government, and that the federal government is the only institution that needs to step up, I think is the wrong approach. The federal government has to step up. There's no question about that, but provincial governments do as well. The business community needs to step up. The Catholic Church needs to step up. There are so many institutions that need to do more to help advance the TRC reports and recommendations, to help advance Indigenous reconciliation. And it also will require all Canadians. I mean, this has to be a projet de société, as we often say in French. We all have to be rowing in the same direction if we're going to advance Indigenous reconciliation. So although obviously with the looming campaign, there'll be an opportunity to discuss the role of the federal government, and that is certainly an opportunity that can't be missed and needs to be seized. But with that said, there's a lot of other institutions, and frankly, all Canadians, we need to roll up our sleeves and really make this happen now that we've all awoken to what the travesties that have happened over so many years here in this country.
Okay, and Olivia and Lisa, I'll get your thoughts briefly. Olivia, we'll start with you.
I can't imagine having to boil my water every time I need to drink something, or being afraid to take a shower because the water could cause my skin some damage. And that is the reality of what's happening out there, and young people living in some of the places without hope. Lots of talk, lots of promises, mostly empty. And because 2 days ago was the 60th anniversary of the founding of the New Democratic Party, the NDP, I looked up what Tommy Douglas said. And he called it a apartheid state, that the actual word is that it's a scandalous situation of what's happening. He says shameful treatment, scandalous conditions on reservations. Those were the words 60 years ago. And it's just beyond belief that we are, like, I shouldn't say we, the government, the Liberal government of the day right now is still taking kids to court. Kids living in reserve are getting less money on education than kids living outside reserve. We owe them some money because, especially those that have been taken because of Child Welfare Act, taken to become ward, we need to compensate them. All of that needs to be settled many years ago. There's been like 6 or I don't know, 9 court orders. Just stop taking kids to court, stop paying lawyers, just do it. We know what needs to be done. There's hundreds of recommendations. It shouldn't take 6 years and not. And what about the Missing Murder Commission's recommendations? God, you know, the piles of recommendations through the years that buried me, because we know what needs to be done. We just, again, needs the will to get it done. So it's heartbreaking what is happening.
Lisa?
Day one government has to recognize that the world has changed and that the amount of Indigenous investment into our economy is fundamentally different than what it used to be. The Mi'kmaq people under Chief Terry Paul have purchased Clearwater out on the East Coast, $1 billion fishery. We have the Oneida having the largest Canadian project on battery storage. We have First Nations and Indigenous groups on the West Coast investing significantly in natural gas. I mean, I think I'm more inclined to advise the next government to remember it's not just about the reconciliation piece, which is incredibly crucial and important, but it's the recognition and the respect for what Indigenous groups are bringing to our economy and the investment that is following and tracking with them, and invest in putting people into that kind of space and making sure that we understand what is needed in order to cultivate more Indigenous investment in these projects, because it really does make a huge difference.
Yeah, include on that the Haida Nation, Lisa, out west. But
oh, listen, Olivia, it just keeps going. Every
Guys, I
time
want to get
to see that.
Sorry, finish your thought, Lisa.
No, I said I'm delighted to see that happening in investment banking, that the players, the big players, are Indigenous First Nations groups in this country. Serious players.
I want to get to questions here because we have quite a few, but I do want to take a moment for each of you to talk a little bit about some causes that are very close to you. Olivia, I don't know if you remember this, but I was a producer at ET Canada way back in the day, and I came to your house and Jack was there, and he was very excited about these basins on the roof that would catch water or something like that. He was very enthusiastic about it. But the anniversary of his passing is on August 22nd this year, 10 years. Can you talk to me a little bit about the event that is planned?
yeah, very much so. We want to focus on people that have the passion to make changes. So we want to celebrate that spirit of, yes, we can make the change we need, totally nonpartisan or multi-partisan. And we're going to have Shad or Ruby Kaur, William Prince, wonderful people. There'll be singing, there'll be songs, there'll be capturing some moments, and it'll be in the evening of August 22nd, all virtual, fear not. And and we want to encourage people to nominate people that are change makers, that they have brought a team of people together to go and make the change that is needed in the neighborhood, in the community, in the country, in the world, whatever it might be. We want to celebrate those people that have put themselves, because they believe in generosity of spirit, and to give them awards to highlight their work. So that's what August 22nd is all about. You talked a little bit about one issue that are not really up there. Jack would never publicly admit it. When asked, do you smoke marijuana? He would say, I never exhale. It's just as a joke. But right now, there are people that were caught smoking marijuana, say 3 years ago. I think the Liberal government at the time, at the last election, said we'll cancel all the conviction. So what we need to do properly is to cancel the cannabis convictions, because most of them are Indigenous and Black. And because their conviction are holding them back, they have a criminal record. They can't go and find work, they can't travel, et cetera, et cetera. So this is sort of a little hidden thing that I'm hoping, if Brian has a pipeline to the government and Lisa to the opposition, this is something we can agree with. Let's just cancel those convictions, and so they could start their lives anew. But I digress, Travis. So come and party, and remember the spirit of being hopeful. Free ourselves from that feeling of fear, because right now with the pandemic, we're just trapped with fear. Let's just stay hopeful and say, yeah, no matter who we are, what party, what we do, we can remain hopeful if we support each other.
Lisa, I want to see whether or not you have any comments on, a struggle that your family has dealt with. Very openly, you've been very public about early onset dementia and how it's affected your family. I wonder if you had anything to say on that and raising awareness about it.
Thanks, Travis. And Olivia, it sounds like you want to go back and run for politics. You
No,
have an
no, thank you.
That was one of the questions, actually.
What about you, Lisa? You go for it.
No, I'm done. So thank you very much, Travis. Much appreciated. So as a lot of you know, my husband Bruce was 56. He was diagnosed with young onset Alzheimer's. He went through some behavioral issues last year, which is very common in young onset, and it necessitated me calling 911. He was brought to the hospital by the police, and then he's been in the hospital since then, actually, but responding very well to treatment most recently with hopes of getting into a long-term care facility. But the place where he is, it's called Baycrest, which is a great hospital in Toronto, which is specific for these kinds of issues, and he's on a specific floor. So on October 7 of this year, I can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm going to be taking part in a fundraising event called Humor Me, where myself and 4 other Bay Street types will be dazzling you with our stand-up comedy for 5 minutes each. And we're all raising money for Baycrest. So I'll be putting it on my social, so you'll be able to take a look and see if you have a desire to donate to Baycrest. I'd be much obliged, and I thank you for your donation. In the meantime, people are going to be encouraged to laugh at me, so that's a good thing for them.
And she can be quite funny. I've seen her at the Parliamentary Press Gallery dinner. I tell you.
I'm looking forward to the next one. Brian, I want to give you a moment. I know you touched on this briefly when we were chatting, but you lead a center, the Canadian Centre for Purpose of the Corporation, and you look specifically at the relationship of government and the business sector. Can you just touch a little bit on the work that you do there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Travis. And let me just say, Olivia and Lisa, those are wonderful causes. Good on you. And Lisa, if you ever want to test drive some of your material, I'm sure the Pearson Center would be happy to organize a webinar. I'll moderate if that's helpful. Olivia will come, I'm sure. So yeah, Travis, we at the center are working on trying to raise awareness on what we think is a very important topic. What is the role of business and other institutions in society? What role should the business community, corporations are often the ones that we sort of signal the most in this conversation globally, but it really applies to all organizations and all businesses. What should they be doing to help tackle societal challenges? What should they be doing to try to advance and strengthen stakeholders? What should they be doing with regards to planet and the environment? So it's a fascinating topic. As you alluded to, there's some interesting dynamics between government and business right now, and especially within the frame of this conversation. And essentially, our research really demonstrates that here in Canada, and I would argue in other parts of the Western world, there's an immense appetite for governments to intervene. Obviously, we could have a huge discussion and debate about that, so whether that's the right approach or the wrong approach, or if there's some middle ground to be struck. But either way, there's a huge appetite. There are a lot of expectations being put on the public, onto businesses, and sometimes onto business via government. So just to give you a quick example, when asked, 72% of Canadians agree that if we're going to overcome climate change, governments are going to need to get tough with businesses and corporations through laws, regulations, and taxes. 2/3 of Canadians would agree with the same statement with regards to overcoming inequalities and inequities. So it's a fascinating topic. I'm really enjoying it. It brings in public policy, business, societal challenges, law, a bunch of things that I really enjoy. And of course, the outcome is discussing these important societal challenges. So I feel like I'm able to make a little bit of a difference. So it's a lot of fun, and thanks for the opportunity to chat about it.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. And we're going to go to the lightning round now because we've got 10 minutes left and certainly a lot of questions. So I'm going to look at my phone here and we'll go around. We'll start with Lisa on this one. But one of the questions that we got was this. Here is the leading economic question from the middle class. Why are we expected to perpetually subsidize tax bills of the wealthiest individuals and corporations? Lisa?
Sounds like a great platform for an NDP campaign. And I expect that's what Jagmeet's going to run on, and the voters will decide. So makes sense to me. Lots of people have been writing about it.
Olivia? Is that the platform?
I mentioned it, Netflix or, hey, you know what, Brunswick? Those that actually escape paying for taxes because they put their account in Panama or any kind of places where they could hide their money. We should go after those to actually get the money so that we could invest more in seniors or home care, that kind of thing. So yeah, I can see that.
Yep.
Brian?
Goes to what the center's looking at, this sort of idea that all we should be focused on in the business community is perpetual growth and profits and margins and value to shareholders is completely being questioned. And decisions like I think the one that the question is alluding to really is based on that kind of old school mentality of the economic system, the Milton Friedman approach. The clear indication is that people want businesses and all organizations and institutions to step up and really have a stakeholder approach, not a shareholder approach. They want them to be focused on delivering value to the communities in which they operate, the provinces, the country, the jurisdiction. They want to see businesses doing well for the planet and the environment. So there's definitely a shift. And if somebody doesn't think that there's a shift, they should just go see what Milton Friedman's approach to sort of the economic system that he espoused in the 1970s, read that, and then try to think of all the conversations that you've heard recently about the role of business, and you can see that something is afoot, change is happening, expectations are changing, and there's going to be more responsibility on businesses for sure.
Okay, we'll go Brian, Olivia, Lisa on this next one, and it's a long one. Panelists, opening with the problems of the current electoral system, every single thing said is due to single member plurality voting and how it fails us. It begs for the elephant in the room to be named and campaigned on. Specifically, I think all can get behind a citizens' assembly on electoral reform, a nonpartisan, thoughtful examination by regular people on the best electoral system for Canada to put this and many other problems to rest permanently. Do you agree? Brian?
So I certainly agree that we should always be discussing how we ensure democracy is robust, how our elections, our representation is going to reflect our values and what we want to see as a society. If we're going to get into the nitty-gritty as to what I think would be interesting, preferential balloting would be interesting on many levels. It would be a way in which political parties would have to try to find common ground, be a little more respectful, I would argue, try to appeal to maybe bases that aren't their own, political positions that aren't necessarily so polarized as we have seen recently in the Western world. So I think there's a lot of reason as to why that could work. For smaller, so-called smaller parties, it would be a way for somebody to vote for them and not feel like their vote is not going towards deciding who will ultimately be the government. So that way they can give their subsidy indirectly by voting for them on the first ballot, and then still be able to vote on a second or third ballot to the party in which they think they would like to have govern and that has a chance to do so. So always welcome robust debate about democracy in our institutions, and that's one idea that I think would be worth exploring.
Okay, Olivia, Lisa?
Well, Mr. Trudeau said he wants electoral reform, and then he didn't. So that went down the drain a few years ago. Yeah, I support electoral reform. Every vote should count. And this first past the post system doesn't work very well. And especially for women and BIPOC folks, people, our voices are not reflected in Parliament. You're still seeing a very small number, whereas we do know if proportional representation comes in, those countries that have that system by and large has a government that reflects the population of the people that vote for them. So yeah, we should do that, but that didn't quite happen last time.
Lisa?
Yeah, I think I'm always open to having conversations about that. And I think our society is evolving. What you're seeing is more of a regionalization of voting patterns within this country. And the one thing about a citizens' assembly is that it would have to not presuppose what the form is going to be on the way out, and everything be on the table just to determine what is the best path forward for people to feel that they're truly being heard. And if we continue on the path that we're on with continued splintering, then maybe folks are going to become completely disengaged, which is not healthy for our democracy at all. So conversations are good. We had it one time, it was top-down government run, and it didn't yield the result that made anybody happy, quite frankly. So maybe a citizens' assembly is the way to go.
All right, next one, lengthy as well. One of the things that became obvious during the pandemic was the crisis of care. Some people had a very good pandemic, investors, construction workers, bankers, yet others, the majority of them women, were under the gun in healthcare, childcare, education. Yet we saw in Ottawa that some of these women who were PSWs were living in shelters while working in long-term care homes because they couldn't afford rent. It seems to me that a more equitable recovery will have to address this issue. I know that we touched on housing a little bit, but if you want to dig into that question, Olivia, I'll start with you, then Brian, then Lisa.
Well, when Tommy Douglas first had Medicare implemented in Saskatchewan, that was the first step, that there was hospital and doctors. But the second step would be home care, long-term care. When people like, seniors and others, our eyes, our nose, so glasses, ear, teeth, all that, mental health, all is supposed to be included in public health. If the Public Health Act actually get expanded, it will include home care and nursing home, and wow, right? That would be amazing. That would mean that those people that are taking care of our seniors and or other folks, PSW, personal support workers, will get paid properly. So I think ultimately two things needs to happen: have long-term care or nursing care included in the Canada Health Act, among other things. And number two, the national standards could then also include transferring funds to the province, but giving them clear standard to say, if you're going to get funding from the federal government, the provincial government need to make sure there's high standard and affordable care plus decent pay for those people that take care of the ones that needs to be cared for.
Okay, Brian, and then Lisa.
Well, let me contribute this thought. One thing that we've seemed to have done in setting up our society is we say, okay, anything that is sort of economic, which in our sort of kind of, I would say, archaic way of looking at things, it's like anything that brings in revenue, right? Brings in revenue for the country, the jurisdiction, the community, whatever it is. That's going to be the market, and they're going to get paid well because they're bringing in revenue, and if they perform well, they'll get paid more, all that stuff. And then these kind of social sector, the things that you mentioned, Olivia mentioned, childcare and early childhood development workers earlier in the conversation. We've pegged that as an expense. So there it's like, well, we just got to keep that low. And what's the biggest expense in those sectors? Obviously the workforce. So it's like, okay, that's the revenue generator and those are expenses, but we got to flip that. We either got to, I would argue, acknowledge that these are investments in our communities, it's investments in our social fabric, in our families, our communities, our health. It's investments that are just as important as an investment that's going to help generate revenue. Or if we really need to, you can maybe then make, I don't think this is the right approach, but if maybe it's what we have to accept, you can take all of those investments and kind of put them under the frame of the economy and revenue generation, right? Let's use mental health. You invest in mental health, you're going to have a more productive workforce. You invest in education, childcare, early childhood development, you're going to have a more productive workforce. So you can, if you have to, put it in the sphere of the finances and the economy. But I think standalone, they are important things that we need to value more. And it's not going to be easy because we've set up this system over a long period of time. But conversations like this, hopefully, we'll be able to move the needle.
Can I make 2 points before Andrew?
Well, Andrew is here, so I think that our time is up, but I will give you about 30 seconds to have the last word, Lisa.
Easily done. Number one, the pandemic has shown us that we do have some real work to do in certain areas. They have been exposed. This is one of them. Number two, the country works the best when public policy is brought together by people in business, government, civil society, institutions. And that's why I'm really happy to be part of that group that Francesca mentioned at the top, which is Coalition for a Better Future. And we're hoping that we're going to have all those those entities coming together at the end of October to have that discussion about what do we do now? Now that we know these things, what do we do now and how do we work together?
All right, Lisa, Olivia, Brian, appreciate your time. I'm going to hand things over to Andrew. And you are on mute, Andrew.
The sentence of the pandemic.
Well, it's not a legitimate webinar until somebody says that. So thank you, thank you, Lisa, Raitt, Olivia, Chow, and Brian Gallant for providing your time and your thoughts. Your experience comes in very useful when you're able to guide us about the kinds of things we should be thinking about. Travis, Dhanraj, congratulations on managing these three political pros. Either they were very nice to you or you were very good with them, but that was really good, and I think you've got a good future in Ottawa. The election is coming up very soon. I don't think people are thinking about that enough. I hope that we have all today, through your work, contributed to people thinking a little bit more about the election coming up. Every election is important, whenever it comes up. And I think we've seen through the pandemic that governments do affect our lives very profoundly. So you've done great work today for us as Canadians. I want to thank you all for doing this today, but to each one of you, thank you for the service that you provided to Canada in your political service. And I do hope all of you run again sometime. There are openings coming up all the time, and your experience is needed. So I know you shake your head, but there is that thing about in politics, never say never. Anyhow, thank you.
What about you, Andrew? Why don't you go and do a
There it is.
I'm shaking my head. Okay, I just want to tell our audience to keep in touch with us over the next few weeks of this likely election. We'll be doing two things. We'll be doing more of these webinars, multi-partisan or focusing on particular issues. And the other thing is a progressive podium, which is part of our website. We'll be posting a lot of articles written by people about the important election issues. And I want to invite people to contact us and write for us, because we will be posting a lot of these ideas over the next few weeks. So again, thank you, everyone. Enjoy this summer time. Be careful, be safe, and vote early, as they say, when that happens. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Travis.
Bye. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.